Hey, Steve August from Steve August Coaching here. And I wanted to check in. It's been a day or so since I left my last video. And the crisis that we're in, it continues to evolve from day to day. And the news tends to send us into kind of back and forth, almost a whiplash effect. And if you look at the stock market, that's for sure going on there. Whatever the news is, the market's reacting pretty dramatically. So what I wanted to offer everybody today was a simple exercise that I use in times of crisis or challenge. And the goal of this exercise is to separate what's really happening from what is bouncing around our heads in emotion or projection or fear or assumption. And so I call it what's true. And I use this on my retreats, and I use this with my clients, and it's a really effective way to sort of ground yourself. And I'm going to walk you through what it looks like here. So I'm going to go to my screen share, and it's essentially just two columns, right? It's what's true in one column, and what's projection, assumption, story, fear, or emotion. So the idea is that what's true is things that are actually happening or have happened versus things that may happen or things you think are going to happen or assume are going to happen or things you're feeling. And that distinction, once you start teasing those apart, suddenly you'll find yourself getting a little bit more grounded and able to see more clearly. So let's just take a run through. Here's what I've got. I'm just looking at the current crisis, and usually there's a framing around this challenge, but I've kind of done a more general observational what's true exercise around the crisis that we're facing right now. And so and the goal is to just be very matter of fact and plain when you put what's true. So I just started listing things, and there was no order. It was just what came to mind. That what was true. The virus has shut down business and sickened and killed people globally. That is true. There's no denying that. We know that the virus spreads faster and has a higher mortality rate than the flu, and that we've seen. However, information is kind of fuzzy, right? Testing is so uneven. We don't actually know the true infection rates, the true mortality rates, and without that information, we just know that it spreads fast and has a higher mortality rate based on what we know. But we don't really actually really have really firm, strong data. But we're in this position where everybody's being forced to make decisions based on this kind of very imperfect data. And we can't actually totally trust information, certainly coming out of China. Even the Johns Hopkins site has kind of changed their methodology for reporting new cases or reporting who's been tested, and it's just because the approach that the hospitals are taking are changing from day to day based on the availability of tests. So essentially, we're all operating in a place of really insufficient information. And in that circumstance, basically we all go to worst case scenario because that's where our protective natures go. And suddenly there's no toilet paper. And that's kind of the world we're operating in. We're all operating in imperfect data and worst case scenario. And so we're all putting forth our efforts to do social distancing, and so we won't know if these social distancing efforts are working or flattening the curve for another week or two. I think New York is going to be the bellwether, right? Is what's happening in New York or going to show a flattening curve or a reduced number of cases, or is it going to show an accelerating curve or somewhere in between? And that's going to tell us what the major population areas are likely in for. And we'll also, we just don't know how that's going to go. The government and private industry are scrambling to catch up, and we know that the government was sort of caught flat-footed, and they've started over the last few weeks to get their act together, but because our supply chains were already consumed by, because it comes a lot of our medical gear comes from China, and that medical gear was consumed and now is being backfilled for China, and we've got a real challenge in getting the gear to our frontline medical staff. That if the frontline medical staff potentially go, then that has a real impact. But so we know that they're catching up. We don't know what's going to happen yet. So we do know that with these social distancing in place, service, retail, restaurants, entertainment industries are all suffering catastrophic loss of business. Like this is just open one day, close the next day by force, and especially for small local businesses, they just don't have that much runway to work with. So this is going to be, the longer this goes on, this is going to get painful. So the economic hit is already really painful, and that's going to be increasingly so the longer this goes on. From the investor and the startup world, funding rounds have been collapsing. People are pulling back. Valuations are going down. This is something I experienced back in 2008 as well. In the midst of crisis, when a market tanks, the stock market tanks, everybody feels poorer. People are taking less risks. Everybody's hoarding cash. So, the world has gotten less liquid. And of course, the stock market has been all over the place, right? It's every piece of news has shifted it in a different direction. And we know there will be new opportunities, but even if they haven't presented themselves. And that's, that could go on either side, because that's almost an article of faith, more than what's totally true. But if you look back in every one of these episodic crises that come through, there are opportunities that emerge. This is a forcing function. It will force us to find new ways to work and find new ways to do things that we hadn't even considered before, and there will be opportunity in that force. Okay, so that's what's true. It's sort of matter of fact, but sometimes you write it down, you get it out of your head, and you feel like, oh wow, I feel clearer because it's not bouncing around my head. It's on paper. These are the things that are true that I know of, and that's all they are, is true. Some of them are really bad, but that's all they are. So then we would go over to the column of what's projection, what's assumption, what's story, what's fear, what's emotion. And the projection, this could go on for months. We don't know. And that's a big thing. What's true is we don't know. And so once you accept that that's true, then you start looking at this projection. It's like, yes, it could go on for months, but that's a projection. It's an assumption. And we just don't know. It could end sooner or later. And we just have to live with that ambiguity. The emotion, everybody's feeling a general level of fear and anxiety because we don't know. We know something, this bad thing is happening, and we just don't know the dimensions of it, of how bad it's going to be, how long it's going to be. So in the absence of information or certainty, we have a lot of fear and anxiety. And the assumption is that it's going to get worse before it gets better. We don't know that for sure, but that's the assumption based on everything we do know. Now, here's an interesting thing. Like, here's a story. I should have been better prepared, especially for you business owners, for you founders. I should have been better prepared. Possibly, but this, when you start hearing this is a story that you're telling yourself. It actually may or may not be true. It's not absolutely true. But what it really consists of is a heaping dose of judgment. And judgment is not really helpful at this point. Having a clear idea of where you want to go and where you stand in the midst of this is where you need to be focused on. And the circle of judgment that can kick in here, especially with the general fear and anxiety around, is really not helpful. So just pay attention to the stories that you are telling yourself about you, and see if you can step back from them and just be aware of them and just put them down, because they're not helpful. And then some real fears. What if my family gets sick? I'm very blessed right now. My family has not contracted the virus as far as we know. And so but it's still a fear, right? What if we get sick? We're being very careful. We just don't know what'll happen. But I know it's a fear. I recognize it as a fear and not something that's true. And then what if my business sinks? Again, that's a fear. And there's probably some early evidence that said it's going to be impacted, especially, obviously if you're in anything that requires meeting up with people, but It's just generally people are going to be less likely or less inclined to give up their cash right now. And so your business is probably going to be impacted, but we're not at the point where your business is sinking yet. And that's where our disaster mind tends to go. So if we can parse that out and recognize that that is a story, a fear, or an assumption that we're spinning and not what's actually true, we can kind of get some distance from it rather than have it be something that consumes us. And that's really the objective of this what's true exercise, is to get anchored in what's actually happening, separate fear and emotion and assumption away from that, and especially the stories you're telling yourself, and be able to get some perspective on that and just focus on what's true right now. And if you do that, I think you'll find that you'll overall be calmer, that you'll have the ability to really go through and take things as they come, and stay steady and level as the events swirl around you. So I hope that was helpful. I am still offering a free coaching sessions for any business owner, any founder who would like a space to talk through the challenges. I'll put the link in the description. But hope everybody out there is staying healthy, and that we'll see you all soon.